let's flip a coin. Head Carolina, tails California, somewhere greener, somewhere warmer.
Haitham, I think is the name. I don't know how to pronounce it. Did you travel in any Arab countries? Yes, I was in Iraq, and I'm learning that I better be careful here on the Arab thing. I just recently realized that the word Persia means more Iranian, so I got to be real careful on what I'm calling an Arab country. But you know, the Arabic country. Actually, I'm in Malta right now. I went into Jordan. I kind of consider these cultures. You're gonna get mad at me, but don't get mad at me. If you go into the Middle East, whether you're going into Israel, Egypt, Jordan, I didn't go into Syria, but I went into Iraq and Turkey. There's a bleeding of cultures across these things, and even Israel has kind of got the overlay of a Arabic mentality. Okay, they can be. It's a culture that is regardless in a way. There's two different parts to the culture. It's a language, and you have languages that define cultures, and then you have customs that define cultures and ways of thinking and things. So the whole thing together isn't as just simple as to say Arab countries. You also got to say what cultures I'm doing. But he also wanted to know about my trip in Iraq, and I'll tell you, I spent 30 days in Iraq, and I entered about 2 months in 2003, I think, in August or September. I think it was about 2 months after the heavy fighting ended. And by the way, I'm in Malta right now. I'm in my 101st country, and I've been to 101 countries and traveled nonstop for 16 plus years. In Iraq, I entered in from Silopi, Turkey, crossed over into Dohuk, which on arrival in Dohuk, I finally realized that I really wasn't in Iraq proper. There's Kurdistan in the north, and there's actually was like, I think, two leaders. One that controlled the Dohuk area, then the other one that controlled the Suleimani area. And then I don't know exactly where they doled up on Arbil. And there's actually almost like a border crossing between the northern Iraq and the lower Iraq. Dohuk was really nice because it was actually the R&R place for the American soldiers. So I met a lot of American soldiers casually, and I actually relaxed because I really wasn't into the more, I don't know, what could have been maybe more dangerous place. It wasn't dangerous at all when I was there, really. I mean, and unless you went looking for it, right? So I was in Dohuk for about 3 or 4 days. I bought some Kurdistan money. And so you have Kurdistan money at the time, and you had Saddam dinars. So we actually had two different dungeons. So to me, I really looked at Kurdistan as being a totally different country. I didn't rate it as different, but to me, they really should be different countries. Then I went over to Arbil for a couple days. Then I made a trip over to Suleimania. And Suleimania was actually north of there. They have water ski and all sorts of stuff. And a lot of the NGOs, the United Nations people, go into this area, and they have the food bank over there, which is kind of a joke. But I mean, they had a lot of food in Iraq, so to me, I don't know what they were doing, sending food to Iraq. But as normal, the United Nations is normally in the nicest places, and they're not in the really desperate places. And I got to spend a couple nights there. One of the interesting things is, I'll never forget about Suleimania, is I walk into a hotel and they said they had no rooms. I sat down frustrated for about 5 minutes, and he sort of sized me up, thought about it, and then he gave me a room. Okay. But I really enjoyed Kurdistan quite a bit because I met a lot of people. I was quite offended a couple times by I always remember meeting the father. I stopped at this little stand to buy some food or something, and the guy wanted me to go sit with his father. And we were having this nice little sit together where we're talking with our hands and stuff. And then all his neighbors came around. And, I mean, we had about 10 people there just sort of saying, I'm American, you know, whatever. Very happy situation. And then one of the mullahs came along and made us all feel guilty, and they all took off. I was really sad to have that happen. That was one of the that would kind of in a way explain Iraq. Okay, actually in Iraq they would put a little cross on, they draw a cross on, I can't do it because I'm holding the camera, but they draw a cross on your hand and ask and point at you and ask you if you was Christian, because they wanted to know what religion you were before they wanted to know your name. But once you leave Erbil, then you make a trip to Mosul. In Mosul I met some 5 English scholars, they called themselves. They were actually teaching English. They teach English and they learn English in Iraq. And they were in Mosul, and I met 5 English scholars, and I spent 2 or 3 days dealing with these guys and talking with them and eating dinner. And it was fun because we'd sit down at the table and actually everybody would eat off of each other's thing. They were very open with their hands and eating the food from the thing. And then I made a funny comment because when I was up in the hotel I was in a pretty nice little hotel. It was cute. It wasn't cute, but I mean it was a very typical hotel in Mosul. And I remember laughing because these 5 guys in the white long things came up there, and I, for lack of a better thing to call them, I said that the 4 men in the Casper suits all exchanged addresses with me, because everywhere I'd go they were welcoming and they wanted to get my address and they wanted to do it. There's a couple real startling things that I realized in Iraq. When I was in Iraq 2 or 3 times, people asked me when they were going to get their passport, and they had not had, they were like in a news blackout for about 25 years. They really didn't know it, and as far as their history went, the conquerors ended up taking over the country, so they thought that because they were conquered by America they would become American, and so they were waiting for their passport. And this was thing. The other startling thing was that 55% of the people in Iraq worked for Saddam. That was one of his ways of distributing money. So one of the biggest, probably, goof-ups America did is didn't really anticipate this 55% unemployment when we got rid of Saddam. The sad thing I got to see, we went well. After I left Mosul, we went down to, I think Peter caught up with me, a British guy caught up with me in Erbil, and then we went down to Mosul, or we went to Iraq straight from there, I think. Where did we go from? Well, we ended up going to the Green Zone. We stayed in the Al Fanar Hotel, and got to meet some Time magazine reporters and stuff, and it was quite sad because a lot of the reporters actually were almost sending their translators out to collect the news. They were so afraid to leave the place. They wouldn't even walk outside the door, and they'd walk out on this porch, and then they would do a news report, then they'd walk back in. But it was right across from the statue. Like when that statue fell over, they actually took that from the Palestine Hotel. So there's some startling things that I realized about reporters, is that for the most part they're a bunch of pussies anymore, and or they just would be collected by the American Army, put in a convoy, taken to a place, and then brought back. They didn't actually. It was sad. I felt like a lot of the translators were making the news, and the sad part is the translators were probably for the most part spies for the spies, not really good people. I wouldn't say that I trusted any of the translators for the American Army. And journalism at its worst, in a way. I mean, I think a lot of times it was really sad because the journalists I met in Iraq were really, they got sent there and they had no desire to find the truth. They just wanted to write a sensationalistic story, so they would pick the easy stuff. And they didn't pick up on the fact that, I went to if you get on my website and search for mass grave, I took hobotraveler.com, you'll find that there's a mass grave where they had 2,700 people. And as far as I know, there was about 50 of these places around the country, and you didn't really hear about it on the news, right? And Saddam was a mass murderer, and a lot of times the Iraqi says, what's this weapons of mass destruction? They would say, you got the weapon of mass destruction. Saddam is the weapon of mass destruction. And he was, but he wasn't, he was killing his people, and that was the thing. But After we stayed in the Al-Fanar hotel, it's just next to just the cheaper hotel next to the Palestine and the Sheraton, where all the rich journalists were staying. We couldn't get them to even leave the hotel most of the time. Then we took a train from Iraq, from Baghdad, all the way to Basra, and then that was fun. But you know, it got up to 40 degrees centigrade. I don't know, probably 108 degrees in the train. We were just soaked, and everybody in Iraq was welcoming. It was a good time, and when we got down there, Chris and Peter, that had caught up with me and was then traveling with me, were all excited because that was where the British were. Oh, I shouldn't forget, I went down to Ela, which is where Babylon is, and we got a tour of Babylon by me walking through the gate and just keep saying, hello, how are you doing? I walked all the way up to the Polish guy that was monitoring Babylon, and I said, you know, he asked me who I was, and I said, a tourist, and he called around, he says, we don't really know what to do, but we're going to show you the place. A lot of people thought we were CIA, okay, because we were roaming around the country freely, which is, you know, a lot more. We were the only free birds in the whole place at the time. Everybody else was in a convoy or under heavy protection. I did meet one American guy that was traveling free, that was basically, he wanted to understand the situation. He was some kind of diplomat or something. But generally, it was almost impossible for the military or people traveling that were connected with the U.S. Army or even the reporters to talk with the locals. They did everything through the filter of what I would say was the enemy of the enemy of the United States, their translators. So there's many layers to Iraq, and it was a very good country. I'm a little bit sad because the Saddam signs came up and the pictures of the mullahs went up, and they say meet the new boss, the same as the old boss. And they were really fighting over territory, and while I was there, a French guy was filming one mullah while the other one blew him up. I mean, this is how serious it was. You think the Americans did stuff. What they did to each other is horrible. And in a way, that was a lot of the justification for leaving Saddam, because he kept peace at the cost of mass graves. But that was my trip in Iraq. I met a lot of people. I could talk about it for hours. It's not the biggest part. I'm not ashamed of the American for removing a mass murderer, Saddam. I'm proud of them. They were liberated, and the sad part is that the American press is just a prostitute. They'll say anything for a headline, and they're making headlines over in Iraq, and there's nobody there to disprove them except somebody like me, and because I'm just a little voice. How do you overcome CNN lying their ass off, right? All these guys make up the news. They really do. I watched the BBC absolutely distort the truth one time in Iraq. It was sad, sad, sad. They were saying there's a protest outside the room with. They were taking their videos from the top of the Palestine hotel, and they were saying there's 10,000 people and there was 100. They're saying that they were protesting against America, and they were actually wanting America to be strong and go into a city and clear it out, and they reversed all this stuff. You should never trust the press. After being in Iraq, I will never ever trust the press, and it's the same with NGOs. You just shouldn't trust them. They will say anything to either get you to donate or to feel sorry and distort the thing. And there is no oversight, right? These guys, there is no way to check up on these guys. Okay. I don't know where you're from. I really wish when you guys would write me that you would give me a little background on yourself, tell me where you're from, so I get a snapshot on how to talk to you. I mean, I can't size you up over an email, right? So tell me where you're from. I like all the background. Okay, Andy Graham, Hobo Traveler in Malta.